Good? My name is Alexandra Kaufman, and I am going to be teaching you a little bit about psycholinguistic theory and Noam Chomsky today. Whenever I research psycholinguistic theory, I actually have a hard time finding a lot of things that were applicable to the classroom, but I ended up finding a couple things that I thought were very interesting. So the first thing, I just want to tell you a little bit about Chomsky. He is an American linguist, philosopher, cognitive scientist, logician, political commentator, and activist. He is considered the father of modern linguistics. He spent most of his career at MIT and is currently a professor emeritus. He authored over 100 books and is recognized as one of the leading public intellectuals. Among his other things, not just as a linguist or a logician or a scientist, he was very well known in the political field as well, with many debates and protests. So his influence is as an expert in the field of linguistics. This led into influencing fields such as artificial intelligence, cognitive science, computer science, logic, mathematics, music theory. A lot of his theory is actually used more in those types of fields. It is a basis for a lot of research in linguistics, but his actual influence had a lot to do with computer science, logic, artificial intelligence. He wrote a highly critical review of B.F. Skinner's book that helped start the cognitive revolution in psychology, which happened in about the 50s, I believe. And this was in opposition to the behavioral psychology of the time. So psycholinguistics, also called the psychology of language, is the study of the psychological and neurobiological factors that enable humans to acquire, use, and understand language. So it's literally how the mind works whenever it is working with language. It covers the cognitive processes that make it possible to generate a grammatical and meaningful sentence out of vocabulary and grammatical structures, as well as the processes that make it possible to understand utterances, words, text, etc. There are several subdivisions of psycholinguistics that are based on the components of the human language. We are going to look at just the basics. Psycholinguistics has three primary processes. This is something that we see in the classroom whenever we are teaching and reading at the younger ages with language. Language acquisition, language production, and language comprehension. Chomsky's most influential ideas dealt with language acquisition, which directly affects the reading classroom, so I have chosen to speak on that more than the others. So the basis of Chomsky's theory is that the principles underlying the structure of language are actually biologically determined in the human mind and hence genetically transmitted. He therefore argues that all humans share the same underlying linguistic structure, irrespective of sociocultural difference. And this theory has changed the way researchers view language acquisition. Before this theory, they always believed that their language acquisition was through their environment around them. But Chomsky's idea says no, it is biologically determined that they are going to acquire language as long as they hear it around them. So Chomsky maintained that humans have an innate ability to acquire language. And this he calls the language acquisition device. He says this is within every child from birth. And the LAD, as it is called, is a child's biological ability to build grammar in an orderly fashion and to produce phrases. So he believes that all languages have the same basic principles, and it is the child that must figure out how the language they hear expresses those principles. So a child has this LAD, and it is biologically an ability that they have to take what they hear around them and put it into an orderly fashion and to produce phrases that make sense. And he said this is innate within them, regardless. And they just have to figure out what language it is being spoken and figure out how that language expresses the principles that are already innately within them. So to prove it, he stated that children acquire language quicker than any other capabilities, which is true. That's one of the first things that children acquire, and it's not even that it's being taught. They just hear it and they acquire it. And also that a child can comprehend changes in sentence type and manages to alter their own sentence in this way. So he said, looking at other children, whenever they hear someone use a declarative, an imperative, an interrogative type of sentence, they automatically can understand it and they are able to reproduce it as well without any help. So an example of this idea of the language acquisition device is that all languages contain verbs. This is something that we know, or most, and that the LAD already contains the concept of verb tense. So this child already has this concept within them innately, and when they hear the word played or jumped and deduce, you must add the sounds d, t, or id to make a past tense verb. So they can take something that they already know, like the word walk, and they can then understand that they have to add that sound to the end and make the word walked without any prompting. And this also is why children tend to overgeneralize and do something like runned, because they know that concept is there and those irregular verbs have to come later. And so this changes the way that we view impairment in children. So in our classroom, whenever we are looking at these children that have an impairment, they're no longer just articulatory impairments. It is an integrated aspect of the developing linguistic system, so we can now approach it in a different way. Another aspect of this LAD is universal grammar. Chomsky states that infants acquire grammar because it is a universal property of language, an innate development, and a fundamental idea that all humans possess. So all humans possess this universal grammar that they are able to then take and put into action whenever they speak in their beginning processes. So an example of this is that all children in basically normal circumstances will acquire grammar no matter their surroundings. So this idea is that all children, no matter their circumstances, once they reach the age of 5, are going to be speaking at the same level basically as everyone around them, regardless of whether they had practiced through their parents or not. Whether they had someone that was correcting their errors as a child, they are still going to be able to work it out because they already have this universal grammar within them. An example of this is that a child says, want toy. A 3-year-old comes up to you and says, want toy, instead of saying, want I, or want me, want mine, or toy want. They know the order in which it is supposed to go. So then the question that this left is teaching explicit grammatical knowledge unnecessary in the classroom? And for a long time, this idea did bring that question to mind. Do we really need to teach grammatical knowledge in the classroom if it is already innately within us? And that is something that I want to leave you with and just make you think about is this something that is truly possible, and do we need to give as explicit instruction in grammatical knowledge as we do? So a third idea behind the language acquisition device is the critical period hypothesis. This came a little bit later than Chomsky. He was not the one that really came up with this, but it is added on into this idea. And this is that there is a limited period for language acquisition, and that ends around the age of 12. So if they have not fully acquired their language by the age of 12, then they will not be able to sufficiently do so. A case that was studied was the deprivation of Jeannie, which was her name for legal reasons. Jeannie was a child who they found at the age of 13 had been strapped to a chair her entire life. She was locked in a room. During the day, she'd be strapped to a chair. At night, she'd be strapped to a bed. The people that came in to feed her were not allowed to talk to her. Her father would growl at her outside the door to let her know that he was there. And she was not allowed to speak. So when they found her at the age of 13, she could say nothing. She could utter stop it. She would make growling noises, but she did not know how to communicate. And when they worked with her, and they worked with her there was a project, the Jeannie Project, and they worked with her for 4 years and found that she never could quite reach linguistic competence. And they say that this is support for this idea of the critical period hypothesis, that once you reach that age, you are not going to be able to acquire a linguistic competence. So what does this mean for the classroom? Psycholinguistics has a wide scope of influence, albeit controversial. He developed this theory in opposition to the behavioral theory, which a lot of us use those types of concepts in our classroom. And so this is very controversial, but there are many people who use this idea. And Chomsky had no educational theory, merely a philosophical theory about the relationship between language and mind. But he did stimulate research, so I found that was where I had more trouble finding information on psycholinguistics in the classroom, because it's not, we don't have whole brain teaching, which is a behavioral method. It was not an educational theory, it was just a philosophical theory. However, with the help of modern science, psycholinguistics now helps modern educators understand the way a child's brain works, along with the deficits of special needs. So through psycholinguistics, taking the psychology and linguistics and merging them, we are now able to understand more the way that a child's brain works. And in turn, this has helped us to understand more the way a special needs child's brain works. Psycholinguistics and language teaching is where it fits in. Language is rule-based and innate. It backs up that idea that language is rule-based and that it is innately within us, that it does not have to be just rote memorization. A child is going to learn it. And it distinguishes between the process of learning and the process of acquiring, which is important within a language class. You must acquire language, and then after that you can learn more about it. But teachers, to understand the difference as the children are acquiring the language, is important. Psycholinguistics is concerned with the process, not the product. So key factors lie in the child and his interaction with information, providing adults, rather than materials used. So for the classroom, psycholinguistics changes a little bit. It's along the lines of what I know we use in our classrooms, that the process, getting them to think using what they already have innately, is important. And I know my principal has us do that on a daily basis. That's what he emphasizes, is getting them to use what they already have innately. So this expanded the intervention approaches to include some aimed at changing the organization of sound structure in the child's implicit linguistic structure. So with psycholinguistics, they were actually able to expand intervention approaches. So some of them aimed at changing the organization of sound structure. So actually going to the basics of what is innately in the child and changing the way that they organize sound structure, and not just looking at articulatory of the way that the child produces sounds. So studies of psycholinguistics, this is just one, just to give you an example of how it is used today. Do our words shape our thoughts, or do our thoughts shape our words? This is kind of the overlingering question of psycholinguistics. There was something called the Stroop effect, and some of you may have heard it and used it in your classrooms. This is how our brain processes words, which is the basis of psycholinguistics. So, all right, so this is the famous Stroop effect, and it was named after J. Ridley Stroop, who discovered this phenomenon in the 1930s. And what you do is you name the colors of the words, but you do not read the words. So if you're looking at this word, you would say red, blue, green, red. And the idea is how quickly you can say it, and if it trips up your mind, and what happens as you say it. And this is just a strange phenomenon that he was researching. The words themselves have a strong influence over your ability to say the color. So the interference between the different information, what the words say, and the color of the words your brain receives causes a problem. And this is a basic idea of psycholinguistics. So the reason to show you that is that this experiment is a classic example of how psycholinguistics is studied, as the findings lead to the understanding of how we attach meaning to words, how we process language in our mind, and what parts of the brain process and control language. And this kind of thought and theory is very important to a language or a reading or really any classroom, as we want children to get meaning out of what they are reading. The way that their brain processes it is very important to us. So my discussion activities for this topic is, should we be expecting our students to use their own biological knowledge to understand and decipher words, instead of first giving it to them and then expecting memorization? That was one thing in Chomsky's theory, was that he said, they already have this biological knowledge. We do not need to give rote memorization. Even the term learn was not something that he respected. He said they acquire it. They do not learn it, they acquire it, because they already have this learning acquisition device. So is this something we should consider in our classrooms? The next question is, what does the critical period theory mean for children after the age of 12 who are still struggling with some of the basic grammatical and linguistic skills? So with this critical period theory, they're saying that by the age of 12, they should have acquired what they need to know for language. But when there are still children, we have them, all of us have them at our schools, that after the age of 12 are struggling with some of the most basic grammatic and linguistic skills. So with this critical period theory, what would that mean for those children? My third question is, what do you think are the benefits of psycholinguistic theory in the classroom versus a more traditional idea of behavioral theory? And the fourth question is, how can this theory aid in the area of cognitive development and special needs? So that is all that I have for you. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you.